to the recording of QC functionality added by IAG's AcuQC product to AcuWorkOrder, which is a manufacturing product that IAG publishes. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to look at how an item would be manufactured, a gas station pump, and basically the kit specification for it, the routing steps, and take it from there. So I'm going to go into the inventory and then look at the kit specification for it. And in the kit specification, we are manufacturing this item. It's a gas station pump. We just have some products that we're going to be using for it. Dispenser assembly, electronic assembly, the mechanical assembly, fuel filter, and each one of these is sub-assembly themselves. They have their own parts. Then we have a routing link to it. When the routing basically tells us that to manufacture this, we're going to go through the 4 steps that are set up for us. And then we're going to look at each one of the steps and the description entered for each one of them. Assemble the fuel hose, assemble electronics, assemble mechanical parts and all of that. And for each one of these steps, you could have a QC functions entered for the step. So you could basically tell it when the pump operation want to test it. But each one of these could have a QC function for the operation. So an operation could have a QC function. Then the items that are involved in the manufacturing process could have their own QC functions too. We have some of these items as we look at, both issuing them to the component would basically be something that we would see that a QC record gets added for them and to the QC activity screen. And I'll show you that as we get to that point. So the other thing, a couple other things I want to show is the scheduling board, which would show each one of the routing steps that is part of the manufacturing. You can drag and drop them from one day to one time hour to the other, or from one work center to the other, or the dashboard, which would show you that for the next so many days for each one of your work centers, what do you have scheduled to work on and the capacity for the product for each one of the work center past 12 months, or what work orders you have that you're working on. So we're going to go into the work order entry program. This is where you enter work orders. Now, work orders in our system could be generated from the sales order if you have made to order work orders that you want to create, or from the work order entry, or we have an MRP screen that lets you do that as well. So we're going to put in that item here. And it loads from the default the current revision and this routing that needs to be manufactured. We're going to put a quantity of 1 and save it, and we're going to generate the manufacturing transaction for it. So what the manufacturing transaction would get generated is tied to the routing that is linked to that item. We had 4, and these are the 4 symbols for fuel assembly of the fuel hose, the electronics, and so forth. So if I click on any one of these steps, it will take me to that step. Now the products are assigned to the work order based on a grouping code. So you can assign every product and to the first step in the manufacturing, or the last step, or throughout the manufacturing process. Some folks like to bring the product in and reserve them, allocate them to a work order right when they start the work order. Some would use it. So this is our transaction 10. This is where we're assembling the fuel hoses. I'm going to remove it off the hold. And basically now there's a function called allocate. Once you do the allocation, that means you have the inventory that was set up for this function allocated. You have it on the shop floor. We create an issue transaction in Acumatica, so serialized or not serialized items are committed. In this case, we only have 1 item that we're using 4 of it in this first step of the process. Now, the way we handle this, the item 2470 has some QC functions linked to it. The idea is when you get to a point that you need to inspect it, you click on create the QC inspection requirement. It would not let you complete this step until you actually completed the QC for it. So we're going to do that. Now it says we're ready for us to do the QC function. So we're going to go to the QC tracking, bring up the QC function, and we'll see for that work order that we had in the system, work order 52, we have some QC functions that we need to perform. That's sitting right here. Now, the manufacturing transaction itself would tell us also if there's a QC that needs to be performed for it, and that approval is required. So in this example, in the manufacturing transaction, this tab shows us the parts. This tab shows us the labor requirements, non-stock items, and the QC that needs to be performed. So we see this, and it's basically what the system has done. It's loaded that into our QC screen saying, okay, you need to go do this QC, which is this one right here, and approve it. So in our QC mode, we basically click on completed. As we mentioned, we can capture signature, print, and inspection sheet. And when you complete this, you basically completed the QC requirement for that work order. That is work order 46, 45. We're working with work order 51. Kit assemblies have their own numbers as well. This is from an earlier QC that we still need to perform. So if I go back to my work order and bring up my work order 52 up and look at its transaction, you'll see that transaction 10 is still here. We just completed our QC function for it. So now I can perform the release function for QC 10. QC step 10 gets done, and any inventory for it or any labor for it gets posted to VIP. Now, of course, it will disappear from our scheduling board and on. And now we come to the second transaction, transaction 20, which was the assembly of the electronics and the screen. Basically, the same type of thing happens. We remove that transaction off the hold. We allocate the component, meaning that we brought all the inventory here, and we're going to create the inspections that need to be performed for step number 20. And what that does, again, tells us that this step is in the QC. If I go to my QC tracking, I will see the requirement. That's the Q52, work order 52, step 20. And I will basically go ahead and finish that function and complete that. And so basically now we finished this step. So if I go back to my work order and look at that transaction, I'll be able to basically mark the work order transaction second. The transaction that notice that's closed. This is open. These two are on hold. So I can come in here and basically mark, release this. Now that I've done my QC, and it's going to tell me, okay, great, the QC 2 is also done. Now the work order is a pretty powerful enhancement. Lets you do your scheduling. You will do auto scheduling. It knows what machines are doing, performing the same unit, and on and on. So we're going to the same unit now. All of the components, labor could be loaded into the order using scanners. We're not doing some of that because that's, for this purpose, we're just basically going through and demonstrating the QC functionality and how that is performed. And then it may look redundant, but each item would have its own QC functions that need to be performed. So we're looking at the basically here. And I'm going to take us to the item and just show us some of the items and what inspection is set up for the item. And earlier we saw that the routing step could have an inspection, but every component that is issued to the production could be set up with its QC. So if you're bringing a computer or its monitor to be used as part of the manufacturing process, you could basically tell it that requires, its own inspection that needs to be performed. So now we just completed that, and we're going to go back to our work order 52 and going to see transaction 30 is here. We go to transaction 30. Now that we've done the QC function for it, we'll be able to basically complete it. Now, as part of our routing, we had our 4 steps, and the 4th step was set up so it would basically create the finished good for us, and that's done as part of the routing for it. So if I take us to the routing, we'll be able to see that. And that's our routing that was used as part of it, gas pump assembly. And notice that the fourth step says complete manufacturing. And notice that any step that you enter, you can, issue to sell. If it's a made to order and you want the cost, invoice cost to the customer, the items and labor used in there, maybe there's an optional step. Each one of these kits could have options, whether you're putting a logo on it or don't put in a logo on it, and so forth. But anyway, we're going to go back to our work order, and we're going to bring up our work order 52 again. So now we're at the very last step. This is the manufacturing step. Notice that the other three are closed. So we're going to bring that up. So in this step, one of the first things we're going to do, since we're creating this finished good in this step, we're going to enter this serial number that we're going to create for it. So we're going to say, I'm going to generate a serial number, and going to tell it that this would become serial number 34, and then so the system knows what serial number that is going to become as part of this. Notice that this QC also has a QC set up here where I could tell it who's the operator that is doing it. So the parts we were able to do the QC as part of the inspect here for the labor that was to be done for this operation. We're doing it into the work order. So we're basically coming here and telling it that what functions we're performing. We're going to allocate the components. Now, perhaps we wouldn't have done it the other way around. We would have, started it, then entered who's completed the inspection. But I just basically went ahead and did that. And I noticed that now we have this step to be done in the QC. And the QC now has two things. This is the 52, step 40 has its own things that need to happen. So we're going to come in here and we're going to basically complete this. And this has more steps. We're going to come in and look at them. So there's these other items in the QC. They also require approvals. So we're going to basically do those also. I don't touch for the 4 of them. And yeah, actually more. So we basically going to select them. So if I just put in the work order number here, I would have been able to see only those. So we just basically seeing all the other components that have set up here, and we're just doing them one by one. So notice that basically got done. So we go back to our work order, and I think this is the work order 40. Let's go back to our work order 40. And so now we're going to do what's called a release transaction. So the release transaction creates in Acumatica what's called a kit assembly transaction. The kit assembly transaction is what basically creates the finished good. Now, as you release each one of the manufacturing transactions that are not final, it would post them to VP. You put an inventory aside so you don't have that inventory anymore. Now we've created in Acumatica a kit assembly transaction, and the kit assembly transaction is the one that basically is the one that in Acumatica would create our finished goods. So we've come in here, we can look at the history for each one of the steps. If there is an QC done, it would show us. I guess we need to do this first. We need to create the QC operations. Now we're creating QC operations that are needed for this kit assembly transaction. So I'll show us in the stock item that you specify what inspections you want to do on the final product, which is the finished good that is getting manufactured for the kit assembly, and what inspections you want to perform at the routing level, and what inspections you want to perform when you bring a component. Maybe you want to make sure the component is working fine. And doing the QC on the component could be done at the last step when you're doing the kit assembly or as you're issuing them to manufacturing transaction. I'll show the difference between those. So now we're going to come to our QC and we'll see for the kit assembly transaction 35, what inspections we need to perform. So we'll see those two in here. So, and mark him as complete. Again, you know, we could save the signature, you can print the inspection sheet, you could do all those things that you want done. Oh, sorry, we actually created a kit assembly transaction, so we need to go to the kit assembly transaction and basically bring up kit assembly 35 now that we've done the inspection for it. Remove it off of hold and basically release it. So this is the process. So basically QC functions are done. By stock item, you tell it what QCs you need to perform. And notice that that's a manufacturing transaction. We said we're gonna, for this item, we're gonna check the flow for it at the basically for that item when it's issued. We make sure that it fuel flows with. And for this item, we've told it when it does the assembly, we want to do this too, which we did the calibration of the pump and the fuel test. So this is the type of functions that you could specify. And so kit assembly basically means once you're doing the finished good, because the item is still a finished good. If the item is a component, you could do the inspection for it in one or two places. Let's just bring up an item. And any one of these items, the QC for if it has a QC requirement, that QC requirement could be done at the kit assembly. So this we're saying, you know, we want to do this QC for this at the very last step, but if I change it to manufacturing, it would be when I bring it to the manufacturing transaction. Otherwise, for this component, if I leave it as a kit assembly, basically, you know, that's when it would happen. So the difference between one scenario, the component is tested as when you have the kit assembly finishing production, in one as you're issuing it to manufacturing transaction at that time. So this is a recording. Hope makes sense. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.